Hi, in this video, I'm going to talk about the prototype design pattern using JavaScript. The prototype design pattern is a creational design pattern utilizing JavaScript's prototype in creating constructor objects. What you see on the screen now is a class file written in JavaScript ES 2015. Now what I'm going to do is recreate this file by using the prototype creational design pattern or ES5. The first thing we want to do is create a namespace. It's a location in memory where we can keep the variables local to this particular object and not pollute the global namespace. So we do that by typing var and the name of the object, in this case we'll call it ES5 person, equals function, and we want this to self-execute, so we put our wrapper parentheses here, and then we put one here, and of course the actual invocation, the double set of parentheses. And then inside here, we're going to write return ES5 person. Now I'll get to the explanation on that in just a second. So the next step is to write the constructor function. Now if you look at ES6, you write the word constructor, which is the name of the constructor function, and the code that you want inside the constructor. Now in ES5, or the prototype design pattern, it's totally different. The name of our constructor is going to be the same name as the object. If that were the case in ES6, and instead of constructor, you would write ES6 person. But that's not how you do it in ES6. So in ES5, you actually write the name of the constructor is the same name as the object itself. So we're going to write function ES5 person. And as you look above here, we have an argument, and we're going to do the same thing here. And open close curly braces, and let's do some confirmation that the object was actually indeed instantiated. So console.log and ES5 person created. Next, I want to go ahead and add the three memory variables, properties, or instance variables to our ES5 person. Now look how we did it in the ES6 version. We said this.name equals n, this.ssn equals 0, and this.food is an empty string. And we're going to do the exact same thing in our ES5. This.name equals n, which is the argument of the constructor. This.ssn equals 0. And again, the reason I'm putting 0, because right now as I'm writing this code, I don't know what the social security number is going to be, but I'm defaulting it as a 0 just to indicate to me or anyone else looking at this code that SSN is going to be a number and not a string. And the last thing, this dot food equals empty quotes. And that's the same reason we do the empty quotes. I don't know what the food is right now, but I do know it's going to be a string. The next thing I want to do is add an eat method to our ES5 person. Now let's look at top of the ES6 person. Look how we did it. It was quite easy. We just add a method eat to our class file and we're done. But of course in the ES5 version, or our prototype creational design pattern, we don't have the convenience of a class. What we have to do instead is add functionality to this prototype, or add a method to this prototype. Think of a prototype as the original or first creation of the object. And before you mass produce or make instances of this object, the prototype needs to be completed. Right now we have nothing to this prototype. We have a constructor and some properties, but now I need to add a method to this prototype ES5 person object. And the way we do that is quite simple actually. We type the name of the object that we want to modify the prototype of, which is ES5 person dot prototype. It's a property, and the function you want to name this, so I'm going to call it eat, equals function. And what I'm going to do here to make this quick, I'm just going to copy and paste the code we have in our ES6 version and copy it right here. Let's go ahead and test this out. So the first thing I'm going to do is instantiate the ES6 person. And before we do that, we need our self-executing anonymous function. I don't want to pollute the global namespace. And let's actually make it self-execute. I'm going to instantiate the ES6, so we'll call it var ES6 person equals new ES6 person, and we have to give it a name. I'll call him Bob, and he is ES6. Semicolon. Let's go ahead and run this, and we should have Bob created, or ES6 person created. Let's go back to our code. So notice we instantiated the ES6, and it said ES6 person is created. Since that appears to be working fine, let's go ahead and now instantiate the ES5 person using the prototype design pattern, or ES5. So guess what? It's the exact same way. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this, paste it here, and we'll call the reference ES5 person, ES5. Oops. And let's not call him Bob, let's call him Scott, and he is ES5. Let's go ahead and run this, and we should see ES6 person created and ES5 person created. So everything seems to be working fine. Let's go back to our code, and let's kind of review what we did here. On line 34, all we did is instantiate the ES6 person, and the way we instantiate a class file in ES6 or the prototype design pattern for ES5 is the exact same way. We don't do anything different. Just because you're doing class files or the prototype design pattern, you instantiate an object the exact same way. Now let's go ahead and run the eat method of the ES6 person. So ES6 person dot eat, and we go ahead and run this. Now you shouldn't see anything, because if we look at the actual method, it just returns a string. Well, that doesn't do you any good. We actually want to see that string in the output in the console. So we're going to go ahead and console log what this function returns, and console log. Let's put this in the parentheses. Let's go ahead and run it. Now remember, we're doing this on Bob, the ES6 guy, and it goes Bob ES6 is eating. Now if we want to run the method and the prototype design pattern, or ES5, it's the exact same thing. So I'll just copy and paste the code. Instead of the ES6, it's ES5 person.eat. Let's go ahead and run it. And you notice that Bob ES6 is eating and Scott ES5 is eating. Let's go ahead and add some food that these two objects are eating. So I'm going to go back to the code. And notice right now, food is just an empty string for both of them, the ES6 and the ES5 person. So let's go ahead and fix that. So after the two objects are instantiated, I'm going to provide some food that they're actually eating. I'm going to set or assign the food property or member variable. So ES6 person dot food equals pizza, and ES5 person dot food equals steak. And now let's go ahead and run it, and it's going to show the actual food that they're eating. To reiterate a few key points here, prototype is just the object before it's been manufactured. You have this one complete object, and once that's done, the original, the prototype, and then you mass produce it and create instances. But let's say you're not done yet. Let's say ES5 person, we need to modify its prototype, or in other words, we need to add functionality to this object. We already know how to do it with one method. We'll just make another method. So we can just copy and paste this code here. And instead of calling it eat, let's call it sleep. And instead of returning is eating, we'll just say is sleeping, just to make things simple. And we don't care about food unless you like to eat and sleep at the same time, which doesn't make any sense. So we just modified the prototype of the ES5 person. How did we do that? We added a method to the prototype. To summarize the prototype design pattern using JavaScript, let's focus on lines 19 through 34. Now, this is how you're going to be doing it in my class for any future assignments that require the prototype design pattern. Again, what is a prototype design pattern? It's a creational design pattern that's using JavaScript's prototypes to create objects, not class files. So on line 19, we specify the namespace is just an environment for our variables to avoid naming collisions. Here is the actual object. You have the constructor, ES5 person. Remember, the constructor using the prototype design pattern is the same name as the class itself. And then we have two methods called eat, and we have another method called sleep. We have a total of 3 methods to our ES5 person and 3 properties. Name, social security number, and food are the properties. The constructor, eat, and sleep are the 3 methods, which is a total of 6 members. The last thing I want to discuss here is line 33, the return ES5 person. The reason we need this is so that we have access to this object from outside of this namespace, from outside of the scope. On line 40, we're instantiating ES5 person, but it lives here, it was defined here on this island, on this namespace. So in order for JavaScript to have access to this particular object from anywhere, we have to make sure it's returned.